You probably don't need me to tell you that the headline put the final damper on the party. We just sat there stunned. It was that reporter, I said. That's the paper she works for. What reporter? Asked Tony. The woman reporter who showed up at poor Polly's pantry. She got an anonymous tip that about the vandalism. Mrs. Wentworth sent her away before she could do much damage, or that's what we thought at the time. Cammy looked puzzled. But I thought Dina Wentworth was an old friend of the editor. I frowned. Yeah, and when the reporter heard that, she got really nervous and left. I wonder what changed things. Guy shrugged. Maybe the editor changed his mind. Weird, I said. Maybe we'll find out something tomorrow. I've got to go home, Cammy said. Music camp's coming up, and I've got to practice. She turned to Mrs. Stanford and Sheila. Thank you very much for a fun evening. Yeah, thanks, Guy added. After I'd said my polite things, Cammy, Guy, and I left together. We walked over to the hamlet, where Cammy's dad was working late. Cammy told him about the paper's headline. Yes, I saw that, he growled. Best thing that could ever have happened. Dad! No, I mean it, he insisted. Now maybe Dino'll get serious about getting us a night security guard. I'll bet she'll call another merchants' meeting, I said. She has called one, Mr. Craiglander said. She phoned me 15 minutes ago. Tomorrow night, 6:30, in Mother Brown's banquet room, as usual. As I told you before, merchants' meetings can get pretty technical and boring. Thursday night's meeting wasn't technical, and it sure wasn't boring. Cammy, Sheila, and I attended it and never dozed off once. Just before the meeting started, Sheila caught my eye and then flicked her glance toward the far end of the room. Krug, look, I don't believe it. I bent forward in my chair. You're kidding. What's wrong? Guy asked, craning his neck. That same reporter is here, I said. The long-nosed one. And she's got her notebook and camera. Guy, who's crazy about cameras, left his seat and took the long way around the back of the room to see if he could figure out what kind she had. Wait till Mrs. Wentworth gets here, Sheila said with a shudder. The room isn't big enough for both of them. Right then the door opened and Dina Wentworth walked in. As her eyes swept over the group, she saw the reporter and froze. I'm afraid, she said in a chilly voice, that I have not invited the press to be here. Then the reporter watched her steadily. Oh, but I had a personal invitation. Mrs. Wentworth's voice changed to a dead calm. From whom? The woman grinned. Didn't say. A hoarse voice called me up this morning and said that there'd be a meeting with the merchants at the hamlet this evening at 6:30, and that I was requested to be there. So here I am. It may interest you to know that this is the reporter who manufactured the sensational headline you read in the paper this morning, Mrs. Wentworth told the group. A murmuring arose around us. I'm not sure I know your name, continued Mrs. Wentworth, and I don't believe it's strictly necessary that I do. But I will inform you that this is not a public meeting. It's a private one. Therefore, it would be in your best interest to leave. Molly Wang got to her feet and spoke in a trembling voice. I think you need to verify your facts before you print stories like that. But my story was true, the reporter insisted. The Turton Street gang is threatening poor Polly's pantry. Mrs. Wang's eyes widened. The Turton Streets? The reporter nodded. Somebody said the symbol sprayed on your store was like a treble clef. That's the Turton Street sign. Who described the sign to you? Demanded Mrs. Wentworth. Reporter shrugged. My anonymous tipster with the hoarse voice, she said, described the symbol in detail, and I verified it. It's the Turton Street Gang. That's why my editor allowed me to run the story. Tell me more about this anonymous caller, said Mrs. Wentworth. Is it a man or woman? I probably wouldn't tell you if I knew, and I don't really know. The voice is more of a hoarse whisper than an actual vocalization. Bob Craiglander spoke up. They say you've gotten several calls from whoever it is. The reporter nodded. The same person each time? I think so. He glanced around him. Then it's got to be somebody inside the hamlet, he said heavily. Maybe someone in this room. Dina Wentworth took charge again. This discussion should not continue in the presence of a newspaper woman who seems to have little. She paused as though to gain control of herself. Miss Warburton, Miss Warburton, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. That's right, said the man who owned the fun shop, a Hamlet toy store. And you better watch what you print about us, Miss Warburton. Country Hamlet takes out a full-page ad every week in your paper. Your editor wouldn't like it if we all suddenly decided to boycott that paper, would he? This was clearly something Miss Warburton hadn't thought of. After a moment's thought, she shrugged, closed her notebook, and departed. When she'd gone, Bob Craiglander said, even though her headline's going to have a bad effect on us for a while, it's raised an important point. We need a night guard. Bob, Mrs. Wentworth began. No, listen to me, Dina. He stepped toward the front of the room. Bob, no one's given you the floor. The meeting hasn't even begun yet. But all the same, look, said Harry Moreau, the fun shop man. Let's all get alarm systems. That'll take care of it. I disagree, said Mrs. Logan. I've been in downtown stores in which they have to have that silver tape running around the edges of their windows. It looks awful. That's right, said Molly Wang, and it signals very clearly that your store is a target for a break-in. People feel funny walking into such a store. People downtown shop in stores with alarms all the time, somebody said. But Hamlet shoppers aren't used to it, said Mrs. Wentworth. I agree with Molly. Alarm systems won't do any good against the type of vandalism we've been having. Only the exteriors of our buildings have been affected. And that, said Bob Craiglander with satisfaction, is exactly the type of thing a night watch could guard against. We've got to do something, Nellie Melba said. My little London bus is already operating on the slimmest of profit margins. I can't afford to lose any business. Finally, Dina Wentworth nodded. You're making sense. I'll begin scouting out security guard companies in the morning. If any of you have other suggestions, let me know. I saw Sheila brighten up, and I knew she was thinking of Tony. But until then, Mrs. Wentworth concluded, let's do our own night watch work. I'll take the 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. slot tonight. If somebody would spell me at 4. I will, Mrs. Logan offered. My Bible study starts at 7 a.m., so it won't be much of a problem. I suggest we use our cars, said Dina Wentworth. Let's just remain in our cars, but drive them to different locations throughout the night. The rest of the group chimed in, volunteering for various slots. And please, let's all keep our eyes open, Mrs. Wentworth said earnestly. We'll have to be our own police for a while.